Hi everyone, I'm Cheryl. In this problem, we're asked to combine the functions f of x equals the square root of x plus 4 and g of x equals x squared by composition. Now, when you compose functions, the order in which you compose them makes a difference. So there are actually going to be two parts to this problem. We'll need to find f of g of x and g of f of x. In addition, we want to consider the domain of our result in each case. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll begin by looking at f of g of x. Using this notation, I can see that the g is going to be my inside function. So I can also write this as f of g of x. Notice it's said the same way. All right, I'm going to begin from the inside and work my way out. So I have f of g of x. Now g of x I know is x squared, so I'll replace that with an x squared. Now I want to find out the function value, the value of f, when the input is x squared. So what does my function f tell me to do? It says to take the square root of the input, which is x squared in this case, and then add 4 to it. So my composite function is the square root of x squared plus 4. Okay, let's talk about the domain for a minute. What's the domain of a composite function? Well, what you need is all the values of x that are in the domain of g, such that the results are all in the domain of f. All right, so let's take a minute and talk about what the domain of g is. So the domain of g, looking at this function, is going to be all real numbers. So negative infinity to positive infinity. Well, what's the range? What are my results or my output? Notice that no matter what I plug in for x, I'm going to square it, which means my answer will either be positive or 0. So the range of g is going to be 0 to infinity. Now I need to make sure that I can plug all of these values into my function f. So I want to know what's the domain of f. The domain of f is going to be all values greater than or equal to negative 4, because I'm not allowed to take the square root of a negative number and stay in the real number system. So my domain is going to be negative 4 to infinity. So now I know that the domain of my composite function f of g is going to be negative infinity to infinity. All right, let's do the problem again, but I'm going to compose the function in the reverse order. So let's look at g of f. This means the f function will be my inside function, so I can write that as g of f of x. Okay. So the first thing I notice is that I can replace my function f with the square root of x plus 4. And now I want to take g of the square root of x plus 4. Well, my function g says to square whatever the input is. The input in this case is the square root of x plus 4, so I'm going to square that. And my result is just x plus 4. Okay, let's talk about the domain again. All right, so remember, the domain of my composite function needs to be all the values of x that are in the domain of my function f, such that those results are in the domain of g. So let's check out those different pieces. So I'll first of all look at the domain of my function f, that inside function. Now I've already calculated that. I know that that is everything from negative 4 to infinity. Okay. Now let's take a look at these values. When I plug them into my function f, I'm going to have a square root function. I know that the result for square root function will always be answers that are 0 or larger. So the range of f is going to be 0 to infinity. Now, I want to be able to take all of these values and plug them into function g. So what's the domain of g? Well, again, the domain of g is all real numbers. So I will have no issue plugging in values of x between 0 and infinity into my function g. However, originally, I can only use values greater than or equal to -4. So the domain of my composite function is going to be -4 to infinity. I hope that was helpful. Thanks.